All right, here we go.
What's good, everybody? I'm Robert Dickens Jr.
This is Ryan Reed.
This is Elanders Frazier.
This is John Gaal, and you're listening to Volta.
Changing the conversation
For percussion educators,
Designers,
And performers.
I want to welcome everybody to another faithful episode of Volta Percussion. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Elanders Frazier. Want to introduce you all and welcome the fellows back with us. Got Mr. John Gaal, Mr. Robert Dickens Jr., and Mr. Ryan Reed, all the homies in the house. We thought we'd take just this episode just to thank once again all of our listeners out there for listening to us, supporting us, downloading the podcast, watching us on YouTube, supporting us on Instagram, which you guys have been showing up and showing out, giving us those follows, liking our post, engaging with us a little bit. And we've got some questions that have come in by email. Before we get to the questions, we just want to kind of jump into a couple of the stats that we've been getting from the downloads from the podcast, which have just been pretty awesome. We're about to hit 500 downloads since we started this podcast last June, which is pretty cool. We're very excited about that. Man, it's such a treat. This podcast was born. I don't want to say out of boredom, but just us kind of chatting it up with each other, having our wild conversations and realizing that it would be entertaining to share it with everybody. So we're glad that we've been able to engage with many others. Just kind of looking around the globe, worldwide, about 80% in North America, 2% in South America, 1% in Africa. We got some downloads in Oceania, some in Asia, and some in Europe. So we are worldwide, y'all. We are international. So we're all around the world. So we see you, we hear you out in Brazil and Ghana, Ireland, Spain, Italy, Canada. We got some Canada listeners out there now. United Kingdom, we see you out there. United Kingdom, Colombia, Mexico, Thailand, Taiwan, shout out, Turkey, Russia. Let's see, hometown in the U.S. We got Columbus, Noonan, Georgia, Paradise, Nevada, East Pensacola Heights represent, hometown, Andalusia, Dothan, hometown, shout out. We got Dublin, Chicago, Illinois, Bloomington, Indiana, DeRidder, Louisiana. Hopefully I don't mispronounce some of these. Madison, Alabama, Jacksonville, Florida, shout out. Ashburn, Virginia, Colorado Springs, the Bronx, New York. What? That's what I'm talking about. Houston, Texas, Scottsdale, Arizona, Katy, Texas, Foley, Alabama, Denver, Colorado, New Orleans, Santa Rosa, California, Westminster, England. Let's see, Conyers, Georgia, Vicksburg, Mississippi, Batavia, Ohio, Brent, Florida, Dallas, Texas, Port St. Lucie, Florida, Forest Park, Ohio, Huntsville, Alabama, Ocean Springs, Mississippi, Alpharetta, Georgia, Clinton, Mississippi, Phoenix City, Alabama, Gallatin, Tennessee, Joplin, Missouri, Bremen, Vigo, Galicia. I feel like this is not the United States anymore. This has led me astray. There's so many different places, man. I'm smiles ear to ear. We can't thank y'all enough for listening. It's just amazing to see all the different places that have tuned in to listen to us just talk, just share our experiences, share some thoughts, some opinions that we have, strong opinions at times, but some opinions that we have about music education, percussion learning, what we think, how we feel, and just trying to push everything forward. Everything about this podcast is about changing the conversation, getting real with the audience, getting real with all of our ideas out there, and trying to move the conversation forward. Definitely with positivity as we go along. So we got some questions that came in. We definitely want to send some thanks to Leo and Zach for sending us some questions in, and we kind of want to address those questions today on this episode's podcast. So Leo kind of sent in a question. We're going to start with Leo's question here to kind of summarize what Leo asked us about. So Leo asked about any tips for young arrangers and designers on how to design a successful show musically and visually. And just kind of the idea of where do concepts come from? How do you go about designing floors, picking music, making it sound good? You know, where do you kind of get that start from? And, you know, where do the great groups arise out of? Like, where do you start this process? So anybody want to kind of kickstart this?
That's a big question.
It is. I don't know if we'll be able to answer like every nook and cranny, but I think we can at least give Leo a couple tips to kind of get him started.
I think anything when discussing about the creative process is you just have to go into it with an open mind. And I don't design, I'll just be forward, I don't design stuff like these other guys do full time. But from my experience, limited experience, and learning a little bit more from Don Click, who kind of designs things with Music Mystique and some other great groups, is like just be open to anything out in the world. Right? He's a big proponent of what Disney does and how they incorporate both the visual aspect with the music and that story. It all comes down back to that story. And I think just having either a pen and paper or in today's technology of an iPhone and your notes app, just anything that intrigues you, just writing it down and putting in different folders or organizing your thoughts. Because even the simplest ideas can have the most profound impact. Like if you're doing a show about growth, what does that idea mean? I mean, that can be just you're walking with your family one day in the park and you see, a flower. Or you could be, you drive into work in the city and you see how a building is built. Like these ideas and concepts at the highest level of drum corps, indoor percussion, whatever. I mean, sometimes they're just the simplest ideas. If you just keep an open eye, an open mind as you walk around life, maybe it was a cool tune you heard on the radio, or again, just something you saw outside your car window. Eventually, some words, phrases, ideas will start coming together as long as you're organizing your thoughts and just making the different categories of this made me happy, this made me sad, this is the color blue I think of when I see this idea. So just keeping an open mind. That's my 2 cents. I'll let the masters of design talk more, but I think that's what's really important when it comes to design is keeping an open mind and then combine those things to start churning the brainstorming phase.
I'd say next, I think you have to have like an emotive element to it, and just make sure that once I'm following John's timeline here, we're designing a show. I think you've got to figure out where your emotion lies and what do what emotion do you want to bring to your show? I think before I even ever start thinking about music, I always start thinking about what kind of emotion I want inside of my show, whether I want it to be very angry emotion, whether I want it to be a very sad emotion, where I want it to be a very happy emotion, whether I want it to be a combination of different emotions. I've done an array of different shows that have done the spectrum, the gamut, you know what I mean? And I think once you kind of put yourself inside of a framework or at least have an idea, then that can really guide what you want to hear because music is so centered around emotions and can lead you on an emotional journey that a lot of the times, once you have an idea of an emotion that you are looking for, you will usually find the music that captures that emotional outcome. You know what I mean? At least that's kind of how I've always felt it. I've at least always been centered once I know what emotional outcome that I want in a show. At that point, I will now start listening for things that make me feel that way. And when I find something that makes me feel that way, that's when I'm like, I like things that sound like this. I like things that sound like this. I like things that sound like this. And it may not be that exact tune, but it may just be themes that sound like this, or keys that sound like this. It may be something as a singular note that makes this sound like this, that really draws me into that emotional element that's attached to that idea, like John said, like growth. And, Leo, I better not see a show about growth in the next year. I'm just kidding.
If anything, Leo, just don't call it growth 100.
Yeah, just.
Yeah.
We're just kidding, right?
Call it metamorphosis.
Yeah, you got to at least change the title. But yeah, man. Once you've kind of got the seed planted in your head, really think about the emotion, because we're all human beings, and somebody's gonna watch that show and they're gonna want to feel what that show is about. A show that doesn't have any kind of emotional impact really isn't a show, right? What are you watching at that point? If you watch anything on television, any kind of media that you consume that doesn't have any kind of emotional connection to it, you're probably going to turn it off, right? You're probably not going to want to watch it. You're probably going to change the channel. Probably just going to, the reason why you listen to this podcast is because it makes you feel some kind of way, right? And the fact that you're feeling some kind of way, that is directly tied to an emotion. So a show has to have that same reaction. It has to give you some kind of an emotional reaction. And that's what we want. We want to have something that gives us some kind of an emotional reaction at some level. And that could just be excitement, right? It doesn't always have to be something like terror or sadness or anger. Like, it could just be excitement. Like, man, this just is purely exciting to watch. Like, it's energetic. That could be the emotion that you're searching for. But if that's the emotion that you're searching for, then you've got to have a theme and music that really drives excitement, and just keep that in your head as you're pushing your ideas along.
I think from a conceptual standpoint, all of that is really great information. And I think obviously you got to think about not only with the emotional side of things, the journey of how you want to achieve those emotions, not just like, I want 4 minutes about anger, or 4 minutes about love, 4 minutes about like constipation. Like, you've got to understand how like sustain works, and you can't sustain that. You like run out of energy. So think for me, it's always about the journey. Like, the high point is the emotional climax of the show, and I got to get us to there, and then I got to get us out of there and make sure that the story is complete. And for me, a story is not like, Steve woke up this morning. Steve took a dump this morning. Steve went to the grocery store in the afternoon. It's not like the narration of a story, but it's as it is journey. So just make sure that when you're done, you've hit your emotional high point and your low points, because those are just as effective as your high points. But that the journey feels complete, whether it's a circle or whether it's a straight line. But it feels like there's the subject, the noun, the adjectives, the adverbs, and the punctuation on the end. So I always try to think of it like, does the story feel complete when the show is done? The other thing, to get away from the conceptual side a little bit, is know as a young designer, because you're probably designing for younger groups, try to find out as much as you can about the group that you are designing for, and start by designing for your own groups. Even now, like I've got a pretty good handle just designing for A-class groups for a while. I still reach out to every group I design for and be like, hey, can you send me a video of where you were at the end of the last season? Or is there something specific that you want to focus on in the educational experience of the kids, or anything like that? Like, what information can you give me to guide the design choices that I make? Because ultimately, nothing matters if the kids can't achieve the design of the show. If the students can't achieve it, nothing else matters. Like, you can't tell a story. You can't write a book without words. I mean, it's a picture book, but you can't write a novel without words. So you can't create a musical story without clarity of what those musical words are and what those musical sentences are. So I always try to find out as much as I can. And I always, when I design for my own groups that I teach, I have to know, and this is being fully transparent, you have to know the work ethic of your kids. Because what you think like, I teach concert, and I used to teach in the concert open group. Like, what I thought I should be able to get the kids to do is not always what they end up being able to do. Not because I don't have the information, but because they just didn't have the work ethic to do it. And that's fine for where that group was. Like, they had the work ethic to get through everything they needed to get through to go from here to here. We just didn't get all the way to there. And sometimes you're just not going to. Those groups are still successful. So just make sure that you can find out as much about the groups that you are designing for, and if you're designing music, work with the visual people, because a lot of times this idiom is going towards very visual design. And as somebody who does this for a living, but also as a fan of the activity, there's nothing worse than watching a show that has the music that has nothing to do with the visual, and vice versa, where it's just like, we took this idea and made a show. What's it about? They move and they play. So just as cohesive as you can make everything. Again, it's the storytelling element. Like, your words say go left, but your actions said go right. That doesn't compute. So just know the idiom you're in is another thing for me. Like, indoor is very different than outdoor. Just as a venue space, this will like, you will get more used to what that means over time. Like, I think the first time we all wrote for indoor, it was probably too many notes. For what you can hear indoor wise, it's like, oh, this gym is boomy and we're playing a bunch of tap drags and 16 notes, and now nothing else can get heard, or the subs are too loud. So just know the idiom and know the ensemble. Exactly, know the idiom and know the ensemble that you're designing for is my biggest thing.
Yeah, I would say to kind of go a little bit more in the visual direction, or a little bit back towards the whole conceptual thing, is find as many ways as possible to communicate your idea, whatever that idea is. So going back to John's idea of growth, obviously you could say, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think growth? Like the most obvious thing, right? Like, oh my God,
the circle of life.
Like a tree or something like that, right? Like, obviously that's probably like the first thing that you think of. Like, it starts off small and then it grows into something else, right? So what could you do with that from the most obvious thing possible from a color standpoint, right? You could think about, obviously, like dirt being in the ground, and then like obviously building up into like brown and all these other colorful things that could be leaves or whatever else.
Green.
Right? So green is definitely one of those colors. Also, you could think of it from a more abstract standpoint of thinking about green being your color of being youthful and maybe not being kind of like being green as in like not knowing things and using that as an idea of youth and an idea of kind of budding, you know what I mean? So also taking that from a musical standpoint and playing something that's very singular, whether it's, starting on your tonic and then like building out harmonically, or if it's starting with one performer and then adding on more people, right? So there's many different ways that you can get across that idea of growth or whatever else it is that you're trying to get across, but you have to think about like how many different ways can I portray this particular thing? Because I'll say for me, I do feel like every show has some type of a story per se. I'm more of a concept person that likes to put things out as like a concept, and there are different points in the concept. So essentially you can make a story out of it if you wanted to make a story out of it, but I don't particularly enjoy or like, shows that have like narration and like, one day this guy started out and blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't like stuff like that in general. So I think one of the things that you can do is you can start out with, and don't be afraid of bad ideas. Like, obviously don't be afraid of like, oh, I think I'm going to have a show called Growth. Like probably the next day you'd be like, this is kind of corny. But then maybe you could think of like, okay, what can I do to move that one step away from corny and like one step away to make it a little bit clever. And maybe you find a story that's about some type of matriculation and you use the color of green and or maybe your uniform is some type of a brown that fades into green, or your floor is some type of brown that fades into green, or it's two colors that fade into something else. Or you could use the whole butterfly analogy of like metamorphosis and a cocoon and blah, blah, blah. Like there's so many different like ways that you can come at it from a visual standpoint. But I think the biggest thing is to keep the concept in mind is like, oh, I'm trying to portray this idea of growing and of like, getting to some particular place. What are the emotions involved with that? Like Elanders said, what happens when you grow? Well, maybe you start out in the beginning, you're very small. So maybe it feels more intimate. Maybe you're insecure. How would you portray that from a musical standpoint? How would you portray that from a visual standpoint? Might it be that you have your performers very close to each other, all separated across the floor, and their bodies are kind of like almost in a fetal position, super tucked in? Right. And then you see that metamorphosis of them growing and then those things coming together however they need to. So I think that's the biggest thing that I would say is find as many ways as possible to get that point across. Second, I would say know what class you're in and how obvious you need to be. And also know how you want to negotiate that within your own creative process. I don't think it's said this way, but I think that it would be accurate to say that in A class, in most instances, you are asked to be a lot more literal. And as the classes graduate, you are allowed, in my opinion, again, I'm not a WGI judge, DCI judge, whatever, but it's just my opinion.
Don't sue me, bro.
You are allowed to be more abstract because there are a lot of world-class shows that from a story perspective and conceptually, they're not very good, to be honest. That's just my opinion. And there are a lot of A-class shows that are way better conceptually and way better as a story, because in A-class, it has to almost be kind of paint by numbers and very literal. So they're given credit for that and they know that they have to do that. Whereas in a world-class standpoint, the playing usually is of such a caliber that you're maybe not going to get dinged for the fact that I can't tell exactly what you're doing all the time, but at least I can tell that it's clean. So I would say, one, know what classification that you're in, because if you are in A class, you are going to have to do some things in a certain way. It's just like the fact that certain groups in DCI wouldn't get called out for, snare drummers having their beads like this. And then the group that wins drums, 2 or 3 people have their beads like this. So, well, how are they getting away with that? Because they play at a certain level and they are going to get credit for that. But if you're, group A and you just coming out the gates, somebody's going to talk about, oh, I can like fit a dollar bill in between your sticks. Like they're going to harp on stuff like that because the excellence isn't of a certain level. So I think that's something to consider. But then again, the other thing and the last thing that I'll say to consider is
You sure it's the last thing?
almost. I think you need to know what you want to say creatively as well. As much as we want to make this about the students, if you're not giving them something that you're personally attached to and that you personally love, it is not going to motivate them to pull that production across. If it like kids can tell if it's just, oh, okay, well, we're just doing this show. Like this is what we're doing. It's a show about growth. There's some trees out here, some dirt on this side. Our floor is like, a garden in some old lady's house. We got some backdrops from, Home Depot or something like that. And this is the show. That's like, well, he's not excited about it. Why would I be excited about it? So I do think you have to decide to some degree, how much do I want to play the game? Meaning based on whatever class I'm in, like I'm going to be as literal and as paint by numbers as is necessary for the kid to be successfully adjudicated. But also, what things do we want to get across that it doesn't matter if they, get it or not, as long as it's clean and effective. Now, I'm not just saying just be doing some stuff and be out here wild. Be like, oh, they don't get our show. Nah, it's just dirty. There's clarity of intent issues. Like it's not always that the judge don't get your show. Sometimes we just can't tell. That person's the main character. They weren't. I can't tell that they're the main character. What do you mean? The show's about like, mushrooms or something. Like I would have never guessed that. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying to go all the way over there, but I am saying from a creative standpoint, you have to get something out of it too. So you have to negotiate like, what is this really about? And what can I sacrifice to say this needs to be clearer and I can play the game? And then what other things can you say, this is the message that we're trying to get across. I really want this to be out there because it's really important to me and the students.
Yeah, start with the bird's eye view and then get more narrow as you go along the process. I want to jump in and say another thing. And I think this was Elanders. I think Elanders said this, so I'm going to steal your thunder. Maybe it was someone else. I'll just credit Elanders. But as you're designing and writing, whether you're writing or someone else is writing, try to get impact points, every 30 to 45 seconds, whether that's musically or visually. Just, again, because of today's society and the attention span, I mean, the more advanced groups can and get more credit for elongating their phrases, all right? But if you're just starting out, just like Rob said, super literal, try to keep, because of attention span, something happening either musically or visually every 30 seconds. And one last thing I also want to say is if you're doing this by yourself, it's okay to copy people. I mean, even the great composers that we all listen to, or at least I listen to, Bach and Beethoven, all the great stuff. Who cares about today's rap and everything else going on? Let's just listen to classical. And what I'm trying to say is, even those great composers,
today's pop music is trash too.
Even the great artists of today, when they were first starting out, they were copying the people that they looked up to. So if you don't have a subscription to I don't think WGI has any more of their videos. I think it's all Flow Marching now, or there's tons of stuff on YouTube and DVDs are out there, but check out some of the groups at the top end. And I'd say at least the top 5, because looking at every year, top 5, open world, whatever, you're going to get some great ideas. If you're first starting out, maybe not 100% copy them, but kind of see what makes them great. What are they doing besides the playing aspect? What about the conceptual design aspect? And then if you do have the money or the opportunity to start asking questions like you're doing now, but more importantly, surrounding yourself with people who either know what they're doing or have that hunger to learn and start designing as a team, because being able to bounce ideas off of other people just opens the opportunities, both again from a design standpoint, to really blow up your show to maximize it as much as possible.
Increase the greatness of your show, not blow up your show. We don't want your show to blow up. we want it to be great. No, I thoroughly agree with everything that John just said. Yeah, I don't remember who gave me that formula. I feel like it was Shane a long time ago. That gave me that formula for like the first 40 seconds of the show, first impact. And then 30 seconds after that, and then just keep it on the clockwork. It's definitely not something I created, something that I heard a long time ago. And it's, you can almost watch a WGI show in the, like John said, a open world top 5 with a stopwatch and clock them, and you'll see it happen every year. And that's just, it's human attention span is what you're clocking, right? Is what human attention span can handle when something needs to happen that keeps your mind engaged and focused when something needs to change. Those are all the positive things that need to happen, for you to really capture, the height of that success. I think at the end of the day, I think the biggest takeaway from all of the information that we've kind of to kind of put a summary on everything that we've said up until now is just that, like, yes, there are a lot of things that you have to think about if you want to kind of get into your design for designing a show, but ultimately, like, you've got to make a plan. You've got to make a plan for yourself and what you're doing. It's not going to be a lighthearted task, right? And the reason why we've spent this time to kind of walk through it like one by one is because it's not like, hey, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do it 2 weeks before we have our auditions. It's not going to be a 2-week process. This is going to be like a 6-month before auditions process, because you're going to want to really take the time to really digest the information that you're kind of taking in to do all of this stuff. And a lot of the times I will say, and I would sure that some of my cohorts would agree, I started planning my shows the year that I was in the previous show. Like, I would be teaching the current show, planning next year's show in my little black music sketchbook, which
it's because you need time. You need time to let the ideas like settle and actually go through it,
right?
Like it or not.
You need time. My wife wrote me a little note in it that always, honey bunny, I love you. But you need time to settle in those ideas. And I would start sketching out rhythms, patterns, notes, ideas. I would start sketching out uniform patterns, anything that came to my mind of what did I want this idea to see. If it was something that I saw, something that I read, something that just sparked in my mind. I keep a notes thing in my phone of just words that interest me. And when I hear something that's interesting, I'm like, that's interesting to me. Let me write that down. And I just put that in my notes thing that just says drum shows? Question mark? And it's literally just words. And that word could spark something that I may never use. It could spark something that may spark something else. And that's just the thing, like John said at the very beginning, like, something else could turn into something else. And that's why like absorbing the world around you is so important, because you don't know what can be that spark of interest that's going to really turn into this blossom of an idea. But you've got to have the time to really flesh out that idea, and it can't be a rush job. You've got to have that full time to plan it out. Go ahead, John.
Now, we've also talked about starting from scratch, which is probably something that you're interested in doing at this time. But if you're just starting out, it's also important to and Ryan, I know you have already written some shows and you sell it, I believe, on your website, already prepackaged shows. Can we just take a quick little few minutes and discuss those pros and cons for young educators of buying a prepackaged show? Should they do that, or should they just go headfirst into trying to design a show themselves?
I'm really glad that you said that, because that was the next thing that I was going to say. Is it is totally okay your first year to just buy a show. And I think that I would say, depending on the experience of the group, if they've done an indoor show before and they've had an indoor program consistently, I probably would take that approach. Because for the most part, kids aren't going to know what's going on. They don't know what it's about. There's so many other logistical things that go into these great indoor programs that we see. One of those things is the logistics of the students. Like the most established programs, those kids know how to load their truck. They know how to get their uniforms on. They know exactly how stuff happens. And it doesn't take 3-4 hours to get stuff done, because those kids have done that activity so much to the point that all they need is adults to supervise them. But it kind of runs on their own, because those people know, hey, we're putting marimbas in first, then vibes, then this props go over here, this goes over here. Like, they already know how to do that at those more established programs. So you have to consider, if you are starting it from scratch, you have that against you as a thing that like needs to be done. 2, you got to consider the logistics of props and the set design. I would recommend trying to keep it very minimal. If I were a first year, I would probably try to do something that does not involve a lot of backdrops and a lot of other stuff, because you got to consider the logistics of getting on and getting off. That's time. That's a part of the competition and a part of what you're adjudicated on. So being that your students have never done the activity before, now you're going to put them out there to do an activity they've never done before in front of people, and they have to set up all this stuff in time and make sure they get on with their show and not be nervous doing that, right? Parents are there. That's a whole nother situation. Like, your parents don't really know what the activity is about. Specifically, if you're in a smaller area where it's not like, oh, we can point to school across the street that they got an indoor program. Do you see what they're doing? And then our parents can learn from them. So that's something that I would take into consideration: the logistics of the students, the logistics of like getting on and off the floor and props and set design, the community, getting your parents to understand it. I think that's another reason why I probably will buy a box show the first year, and also something that's a little bit more easy to understand from a conceptual standpoint, because you want those parents to have a good experience. You want the students to have a good experience. And it's like, oh, I know what the show was about. The show was about this seed that grew into a tree. Yeah, it was kind of cheesy. That's maybe not what I wanted to do like year 20, because I think it's a little whatever. But guess what? All the kids came back because they understood what the show was about. All the parents liked it because they understood what the show was about. The kids probably did pretty well because the judges liked it, because they played fairly well and everyone understood what the show was about. And then you can grow from there into, this vision of, what's pushing the activity forward and what you want your group to be, and the top groups and all that. But you got to start in a way that allows you to be successful, because even if you have the greatest design, like think of whatever the greatest show could be, if you don't have the logistics underneath that to support that, you will still fail. Like, if you have the winning show from this year, if that group gave you their show, if you don't have the teachers, you still can't pull it off. If you don't have the parent support, you still can't pull it off. If the kids don't have the logistics of understanding how to run the program, you still can't pull it off. If you don't have the training and the time and the schedule that it's going to take for those kids to get to that level, you still can't pull it off. So I would say my advice first year is just make sure nothing is on fire. Like, make sure all your parents are like, oh, this is cool. I get what's happening. Make sure the kids are like, oh, this is cool. This is what indoor is. I like what's happening. And if you can get through that and get people excited about the activity, then you can branch out into those other things where you want to show your design voice. You want to put your message out there. You want to put your stamp on the group, later on. But I feel like the most important thing is to get that group going, get them successful on some level, and get all the parents and everybody buying into what it is that you're doing.
I think that's still putting your stamp on the group, is making sure that the group is successful logistics
Correct.
and organizationally. You know what I mean? That shows that you're very serious about the product and you don't want them to fail. And so that still meets that 6 month in advance timeline and making sure that everything is set up from Jump Street.
Yes.
Yeah, I would also say, and I'll approach this from like I do the design thing, but I am also a percussion director at school and have been in the same situation, is if your program has other needs, like from a budget standpoint, there's nothing wrong with going that route to put yourself in a position to be more impressive or more successful in the future. This is a long-term game too, a long game as well, in terms of like, if you blow your entire budget the first year, you're not guaranteed to come back out the second year, and if you put it into this huge design, and the design's going to set you back like a couple $1,000s, there's nothing that says it's going to be successful and the kids are going to be better for it. But if you need cymbals, maybe that couple $1,000s is better off putting cymbals, so that way when you come back out with a custom design show, you have a wider palette that you can now create with. If you need another marimba, instead of having to spend $4,000 on that digitally printed tarp because that's the one that matches your show design, just buy the marimba. So that way you can have more kids be in your group, and in a couple years, the income that you've generated by having another marimba to take another member will now buy you that tarp after you've had a couple more years with that marimba, a couple more kids trained, and you're in a better position. So I always look at where on our trajectory are we as a program. If there's needs that supersede a custom design show, a box show is a great thing. The pacing's done for you. A lot of the times the electronics are done for you. Like, all you got to do is plug and play and teach. Especially if you're starting the group from scratch, wherever that is. Like, if you have been in the same position that I've been, where it's like, all right, we got to teach these kids like how to hold drumsticks. The bass line is all wind players. The cymbal players have never seen cymbals before in their lives. Half the front ensemble is wind kids that are asking which end of the mallet to play with. The last thing I want to be doing is writing a show on top of all of this. I want to be able to just teach the kids and be like, all right, I need a box show. Maybe we'll tweak the concept a little bit to fit the climate of the kids or the culture of the kids, but it's done. Like, the pacing's done, and the pacing is good. Nobody is selling a box show that was bad. Nobody's selling the first draft of their box show either. Like, they've tweaked it. They've given you the WGI finals version of it, or as close as it can be. Maybe afterwards they've been like, I missed that thing. I should have changed that. Let's tweak that. Maybe you're getting a better version than what they did at finals.
True.
But you always got to think as a director, like, where am I at in the trajectory of the group? Because if I can come out with, trash can lids for cymbals, it's not going to sound as good as, that high school down the road that's got a full line of Zildjians and like sizzles on everything and splashes and all this while we're hitting cans, So I think that's another point for like box shows and that kind of stuff is like, is your group set up to make a custom show truly come to life musically?
Additionally, there are tons of designers out there that have these pre-packaged shows, not just what Box 7 is. I think that's the main that we've been referring to, or Box 6, whatever. There's, like I said, there's tons of.
No, we're not gonna say their name. They ain't paying us.
Okay. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter.
Shout out.
There are tons of designers out there that have their own pre-packaged show. And if you, again, want to get into that designing game or educate yourself, a lot of these designers will sell you their shows that you can tweak based on your numbers, but you can also ask them, why did you write it like this? Why is this design like this? And each year that you get a different show from a different designer or a designer that you like, you can start learning the process as well, no matter who you get that program from.
Listen, I'm not down on Box 6, okay? The first year that I went to a school and they had an indoor program already, you know who I called? No.
Who'd you call? Ghostbusters!
I bought a Box 6 show. Why? Because it was put together well. I mean, they have a lot of good shows that are well put together. Are they used very often? Yes, because they're put together very well, and they probably have already won something, and they probably have a video of exactly what they did and exactly why it won, and they are very explicit about like the effects and what you can do, and it's great. It's great for what it is. You know what I mean? John Mapes, y'all gonna cut the check. Cut the check soon.
Yeah. Lots of different programmers out there. So to wrap up our opinion session here, and advice to Leo for reaching out to us just for some advice here. The design process takes a minute. If you're just getting started, it's okay to ask for help and to lean on some people that have done it before until you kind of get your own process up and started. So don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid to do that the first year or two until you get your own in-house design team up and running. It's okay to do that and just continue to master and mold your own process. And we appreciate you wholeheartedly from all of us reaching out here to us to hear what we had to say on it. But once again, we see that show called Grow out there on the floor. We want you to give us that credit. Shout us out
for our money.
So we really thank you again, Leo, for reaching out to us. Thanks so much. We had another question come in from Zach. Man, thank you so much. We got time. We're gonna answer this question.
Just making sure.
So this one's more just kind of leaning on our I guess this is less about kind of what to do and just more about us. So Zach reached out to us. He kind of just he said he listened to our most recent one about mastery. And just talk, we talked about, of course, in mastery about allowing specialists to come in that have different, expertise in certain areas of percussion, etc. And he asked about, with the arts, especially marching arts, moving into the reality of more use of main stage, sound effects, miking, etc., where we are, the four of us, are in terms of balancing out our abilities, experiences, and our specialties and what we bring to the table as arrangers and composers And if we have any short or long-term goals to make main stage sampling, etc., a primary function of how we arrange and teach.
I'll go first again, since I'm the youngest. I say I have taken classes in college on Logic, Pro Tools, Main Stage, all that. It is, I would say, an essential requirement that you need to know how to use these programs to, or at least be extremely familiar if you want to write, compose yourself, or at least communicate with designers or technicians on how to use the program if you're teaching a tech to teach a student, or to at least download the music, understand what's happening. I have a whole other thing I wanted to say before I said that, and it totally slipped my mind.
Got him.
Oh, my word. My mind just blanked on everything. But it's extremely important to be able to know how to do all that. And if you don't know how to do any of that, once again, going back to what we said to Leo's question, asking for help. There are tons of Facebook groups with extremely smart, talented individuals who are super helpful and reliable on the information they present. There's tons of YouTube videos to watch. And there are a lot of individuals out in the United States. I haven't been out of the country, so I don't know about that. But at least in the United States, sound technicians that would be more than happy to come check out your program and help you decide what type of electronics you need to purchase, what type of programs, how to connect everything together to make your group sound the best. But I will get back to what I was about to say once other people talk first.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, because I feel like the electronics, the change and the addition of electronics has allowed us way more colors and way more opportunities, and can allow a really small group to still sound humongous if you have a pretty decent sound system. So I personally, my skill set, I primarily started as a battery person. That was what I always was pretty much familiar with. Growing up in church, I played organ, not the pipe organ, but like blues, Black people organ, if that makes sense. Like, that you see at the end of some church movie or something like that, where they have the obligatory church scene, and all the 90s Black films where like everybody's been fighting the whole time, and they like finally get back together, and everybody's just like, oh, okay, I love you, so that kind of organ, you know what I'm saying? So so I grew up doing that. So like harmonically and stuff like that, like I understood that, and I had that kind of a background just because gospel music has so many borrowed and so many cousins, and like, jazz and any type of music that Black people were in. Gospel music is just that complicated. So, but that's kind of my background. And I started the same as John. Like I learned Logic and Main Stage and stuff like that in college and audio principal classes. So I would say that's more so what I'm familiar with is those two things. The things that I wasn't very familiar with was just front ensemble stuff, like outside of knowing how to play a couple 4-mallet pieces and knowing how to hold the mallets. Like, cool, that's the extent of like what I know. So I sit around my front ensemble people and like try to learn and like figure out how they teach technique and stuff like that. But that's just not probably what I would prefer to teach if I had to teach. So I do tend to try to outsource that as well as the electronics, because I have been in groups where I had to do everything. And I figured out and learned a lot with electronics, but I would prefer to not have to do that if I don't have to. So that's kind of my background, but I would definitely want to reiterate what John said about like, it's very simple to figure out. Like Main Stage, figuring out how to click and drag stuff. Like honestly, after using Main Stage the past couple of years, I probably will never use an SPDX pad ever again or DTX. Like, for what reason? Like what point in time would I need to do that when I can literally drag that joint in the main stage and cut those words up chromatically and all those sounds, and just like, it's a way simpler. It's easier to teach a kid how to do it, in my opinion. It's just, oh, I want this a little bit lower. Cool. Double click, boom, -3, boom, fixed. Like, so much stuff that is a way simpler to figure out how to do versus like doing all these different things at one time. So that's what I would say. Definitely get used to it. Or if you're not used to it, find somebody that knows how to do it and that can make it sound great, because that can be a beast if it's not there. It can make it really empty.
You know how mad I am that I got good at being able to manipulate a DTX for everybody to move to main stage. And here I am, the next master, trying to hold on to it 2 years into the main stage revolution. And people was like, you ain't on main stage yet? I'm like, nah, man, I still got this DTX. And like, why? Man, shut up. I was my only comeback. Like,
when main stage is $30 too. That's what's crazy. Like, main stage is like $30.
Right, versus a $600 DTX. Like, what was I thinking? And WAV files. Like, what was I thinking? Like, gotta email it. Like, what was I thinking? Yeah. So I was a self-proclaimed. I was doing all right at DTX. I can honestly say I still got a long way to go at front ensemble stuff. I think in the last year, I've come a good bit of ways of learning how to hold mallets properly. I've always known how to read the music because I started off as a saxophone player. So I know how to read treble clef and bass clef. I know how to read piano music. I have a piano. I don't play it very often, but I have one. I feel like I always find niches that fit me. And that's what I've always kind of centered myself around. But I'm not I try not to be ignorant in the room. So when somebody's talking about something, I always just try to listen very patiently and try to just make sure that my attention carries. So if somebody is talking about something that I'm not familiar with, I try to pay attention to that so that I can learn something new, because I always feel like new information is valuable anywhere that I'm at. So especially being around these three, I've learned so much in the last however long we've been around each other. Every time they're talking about something, I learn something new and interesting and relevant. I keep saying last summer, and that was not the last summer that we did DCI. That was 2 years ago now. 2019, I learned a whole lot about main stage. And to Rob's point, I learned how simple it was. And that's when I started beating myself up about how much I knew about DTX. And here a 17-year-old was showing me how, I think he was 16, was showing me how easy main stage was. And I was just like, and what did you do now? And he was like, yeah, you just drop this here. And I was like, and do what now? I really felt like a grandpa because my eyes was squinting. I was dropping my glasses. And he was just like, yeah, you just drag and drop. And I was like, and show me that one more time. he was just dragging. This was Paul. He was just dragging and dropping things.
Generation difference.
Yeah, just dragging and moving them around. And I was just like, I was like, I never knew, so you learn new stuff all the time. And I say every conversation is worth having that you're going to have. So, just take the time, open yourself up to those conversations and learn. And so that's what I did. I think there's more that I can always learn. So I never turn myself off to those conversations. I never turn myself off to those potential YouTube videos, wormholes that I can always find that information because it's always relevant, especially if you're in the activity, you know what I mean? And then definitely to their point, finding people that can come in and show you stuff. When we had our electronic systems built at Southwind a couple of years back, I learned a lot about miking and how things are mic'd up, how cable connections work. because I had to learn how to troubleshoot it. You know, I didn't want to be in a situation to where I was the only person on tour and I didn't know how to troubleshoot our miking system. I didn't want to be in that situation, so I had to learn. So, you know, it's one of those things, and I'm sure you know that, you know, I feel like any person that's a percussion director at a school has had to learn something just for the sake of troubleshooting. You know, you had to learn how to drive a truck just for the sake of troubleshooting. You know what I mean? Like, what if I got to drive this truck because somebody don't show up? You know, the kids got to get to the show. You know? And now you driving the band truck. You know what I mean? Like, exactly. So it's like, you know, exactly. So it's like you got to learn stuff sometimes just because of the sake of it. And I always lean on that, just like, never be unwilling. And sometimes you may find something that you really love. I did that with drill writing. Like, I one time was put in a situation where I had to write drill because, you know, we needed some drill rewritten and there was nobody to rewrite it. And I had to rewrite it. And I liked it. And then I started writing drill. And then, you know, 12, 13 shows later, I became a quasi drill writer. I was writing for all of my groups. I was writing for other groups. And it became a passion of mine. And I've held my own writing drill. I can't say that they're all good, but I've made finals a couple times. You know what I mean? So it's just, you gotta be realistic. Thanks. You know, you got to be realistic about, you know, what you want to get out of what you're doing and have fun doing it. You know what I mean? Like, you're not gonna, you know, I don't think that you have to hold yourself to the super high standard of knowing everything there is to know about everything. Like, yes, there may be one person that knows everything there is to know about everything. I congratulate that person every day of the week. I want to meet them. I want to shake their hand. Well, fist bump, 2020, 2021. But, you know, but at the same time, like, I'm going to be super realistic with myself and say, yeah, I know a little bit about a lot, but I'm very passionate about a couple of things. And I will talk to you about the things that I'm very passionate about and hope that we can converse and share some deep thought about some things that I'm really passionate about. Like, I'm really passionate about snare drumming. And if you want to sit down and have a conversation with me, I will break it down for you about a lot of things that I'm passionate about, specifically about marching rudimental snare. We may not agree on everything, but I can have a very, very long conversation with you about it. You know what I mean?
Talk about them suede heads.
Yeah, let's talk about them suede heads. Right? Let's talk about them. You know what I mean? Like, I can have a long conversation with you about it because I spent a lot of time doing it. And that's just the thing. Like, when you've spent a lot of time doing a couple of things, you can have those conversations. When you haven't spent a lot of time doing it, then that's where you want to open yourself up to having more conversations with different people, to get more perspectives, to get more information. And when I say, like, you know, what's my long-term goal is to have more conversations with more people so that I can just get more information. Like, my whole lifelong goal is to just soak up as more information until my brain kaputs from, you know, overload. Literally, like, I realize that my brain is a living computer and at some point it's going to shut down. That's life, right? We are living, breathing computers. Computers aren't around forever. We just happen to be the longest living computers on the face of the earth. You know, computers have yet to match the computing processing speed of a human being. That's why AI can't take over yet, right? Like, they can't match what humans can do yet. You know, people like to think that computers can, but not yet. You know, they're close, but not yet. They haven't crossed that threshold yet. Thank goodness. Shout out to, you know, Skynet, Terminator. It's not here yet. They haven't caught us yet, y'all. I'm just saying. Not as of today. They haven't caught us yet. So, you know, my lifelong goal is to continue to just, you know, keep working this brain out as much as I can. Keep taking in information. And as I take in information, I want to share that information. I want to share that information with anybody and everybody that wants to have that conversation, because I'm not going to be here forever. And I don't want all this information just stored up in here like some old USB drive that nobody uses anymore. Everybody got one of them USB drives. Everybody got that USB drive that you used in college. You don't know where that thing yet. It's in a closet somewhere. It's in your book bag. It's in your book bag at your mama house, at your daddy house, at your grandparents' house. You ain't use that thing, right? I don't want to be some old USB drive that's just thrown somewhere. You know what I mean? Like, I want to be able to share that information with people so that people can continue to share and grow with that experience and build upon that knowledge so that the future can continue to use that knowledge going forward. And hopefully it'll be helpful and worthwhile for others.
So my background is a little bit different. I think it's a little closer to Elanders than it is to Roberts or John's. I only learned how to use Sibelius in college because we didn't really have a electronic program other than like a music notation class. So I learned how to use Sibelius there, and then everything else I learned had to be in an ensemble setting. I spent 5 years as the percussion director at a school with no other percussion staff. So if we were going to do electronics, I had to learn the electronics. If we were going to have a battery, I had to learn how to teach the battery. And if we were going to have a front ensemble, I was going to teach the front ensemble. And I started in high school as like a drummer. You know, I didn't really, I remember going into a lesson my senior year going, hey, I think I want to do this music thing. Getting my first mallet solo and going, all right, which C does it start on? And that was my senior year of high school. And then from there, just fell in love with playing mallets in college and grew from there. But I got out of it and I started teaching. I mean, I'll tell you, in 2013, it was my first year teaching Matrix. The electronics were a foreign thing to me. It was like those kids that played the electronics knew how to work the electronics. I knew how to teach the keyboards, so I taught the keyboards. And then the electronics just did their thing. And then again, I took over as a percussion director and was like, all right, if we're going to do this, you got to learn it. And if we're not going to do it, and if you don't learn it, we're not going to do it. And that was coming out with an indoor program that for a school that had a successful one before then. So I learned how to use Contact. So that I learned Contact, which is a very convoluted first system to learn, and then got turned on to Main Stage, and I was like, oh, Main Stage at first is super hard to like figure out because you got to go into like all these different windows and figure out all this stuff. But then once you learn it, you're like, oh, this is way better, and I can bring Contact into Main Stage, so I can use all the sounds. So that's been exciting. But I mean, I didn't learn Logic up until a couple of years ago, and like digging into Logic and that kind of stuff when it was like, okay, I kind of have to. And I got tired, honestly, of like waiting on people to send me sound stuff. I was like, I'm relatively intelligent and I know kind of what I want things to sound like. So why don't I just learn it and do it myself? If I'm writing music for other groups, why can't I also make myself more marketable by also saying, hey, I can do your sound design too, instead of I can write your beats, but you got to go somewhere else. So I've had to learn everything because I had to either take the next step for my ensemble in that knowledge or the next step for my business in that knowledge. And I think there's something to be said about like when you have to learn things that way versus like learning it in a class. I'm sure like academically, John and Robert can get around Logic and Main Stage way better than I can. But like I know what I have. I know what I need to do to get the things to sound the way that I want to. I don't know more than that. And I don't know less than that. So it's like, I think there's something to be said. If you can learn it in a class or take a class, I think that's great. But also if you have to learn it out of necessity, I think that's totally fine too. And that's kind of where I've had to learn everything. You know, in my program now, I kind of run everything. I primarily serve during marching band as the battery instructor because I got a couple front guys. Even though, like in the drum corps indoor world, I am a front ensemble guy. Like that's what I do at Southwind. That's what I did when I taught Phantom Glassman. You know, at Matrix, I'm the front ensemble guy. Like that's what I am known for there. But at my high school, I'm the battery guy because we don't have anybody else to teach the battery. So, like, the next step for me I want to get better at is like my intermediate advanced battery skills and figuring out how to get my left hand to actually play traditional grip. But like for me, it's becoming more well rounded. I would also love to like devote time to play drum set because I've never devoted time to playing drum set. As I'm just looking at Elanders drum set in the background. I need to not live in an apartment building before I bust out the drum set and start.
This is also true. Yes.
But I mean, that's the thing for me. I mean, just I've learned how to make things sound good. Now it's like, all right, I need you guys to just do more.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm at is having conversations, learning stuff. Like for me, don't be afraid to pick up the phone call to somebody that knows more. Like I have 2 guys. Anytime I'm like stumped electronically, I'm like, I got 2 guys I call or text them both at the same time. Whichever one calls me first is like who I'm going to get the answer from. And I do that all the time, like multiple times a season. That's how I learned. We got a new mixer this year. I went from Behringer to Personas, and now I'm like, all right, I know nothing about this board. It's time to, I guess I got to learn. Hey, help me out.
Yeah, Behringer, the Personas. Yeah, we got a Behringer too. But we just I think we got a Personas board from like the drama. Somebody, they needed a new board or something. They got some new stuff in the auditorium, so they're just giving us this nice Personas board. So I'm like, thanks, all about it.
Yeah.
Ryan, I want to thank you for giving me a nice compliment and saying I'm really smart academically, but I just want to let everyone know that I'm a terrible person in the sense that if I don't do it every day, I forget about it, just like that. So Ryan is so much better than me. Don't come to me, ask questions on how to do Logic or Main Stage or any of this, because I don't do this on a day-by-day basis. I've done, like, my trajectory is I started piano, and then my friend gave me Sibelius in high school. And we'll
Gave you Sibelius?
Pirated copy?
I'm not going to say anything, whether it's legal or illegal.
Okay, plead the fifth, John. Plead the fifth.
I'm playing every number known to man.
Hello. Forsyth Central.
Top space.
But that's yeah. Well, I wrote some pit stuff, but I've never published anything just because I just never have. But anyway, at that point, I taught myself how to do Sibelius, and then when I went to college, of course, I took classes because those things interest me, like sound design interests me. And then I took some drill writing classes because I'm in a march drum course and I liked the design of how to write drill. And so I kind of took some classes on that. But now even though I'm a band director with my school and our situation, I passed all that responsibility to someone else. We just buy like a prepackaged show because where we are right now, my main focus is just building a program. So I don't have time to, like we've already talked about, designing a show. And because I don't have customers, so I'm not actively writing drill or music all the time, those skill sets have diminished. So I do want to say thank you, Ryan, for giving me that nice little shout out. But my new skills as I've developed have been more into the finance, business, management type of things. So long-term for me is, while I've always been musically, that's just been my passion is music. And that's actually why I stopped being an engineer and went music full time. It's kind of funny because now I'm kind of going back into that finance business realm. My goal is to be a millionaire in 10 years so that I can be financially free, so that I can do what I want when I want to do it. So then when I have all this money, eventually I'm going to go back to music and be able to write and create and teach the groups I want to do and not have to worry about money because I'm going to be a millionaire. Now I'm already living, I guess, the dream job because I'm already teaching music, which is what I really enjoy doing. And I just got another part-time job as a sales rep for Tarpley Music. So I'm learning more about everything else besides percussion, brass, woodwinds, orchestra, everything, the whole business aspect. So if you guys need anything, you just call me at Tarpley Music in Burleson. I can hook you up with some nice discounts. But yeah, so anyway, I'm gonna.
All right, great.
That's the goal, is to make a lot of money. So then again, my passion, I can just do music and not have to worry about money. Not that you guys care, but that's what I'm going to do. So I've been teaching myself everything about stocks and growing a business and drop shipping and everything that we don't talk about on this podcast. But financial literacy is important that we do talk off camera from this podcast, which maybe we can talk about in a different episode about the finances and music and how to survive and even thrive in later episodes.
So, yeah, I think to kind of summarize, everything for answering Zach's question, I think like for,
okay, time out. I want to say one last thing.
Go ahead.
We are all part of the percussion team at Southwind, and I really like my job because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan writes all the front book and the sound design, and Elanders writes the battery, but he basically is always talking to Rob, so they're both writing the battery book. I don't do any of that writing, and so I like my job because I get to come in after everything's done and pick it apart and ask all the questions of why they wrote this, why they're doing this, why this isn't lining up. And that's really my job at Southwind from a percussion music standpoint. These guys are in the trenches doing the work. But that's why I really like my job, because I get to pick apart their creativity and ask all the questions. So that's going back to summarizing everything up. We have all come from different avenues, but it doesn't really matter where you're coming from. As long as you have an interest in something and you pursue that interest, you can learn anything, because in today's society, everything's available to you from an education standpoint.
I am proud of that summary, John.
Aren't you very talkative tonight? I was very.
Kudos. I really
for this one.
Well, I haven't had dinner yet, so I'm still awake, I guess.
I think you took a nap. I think that's what that was. I don't know. I hope we answered. I mean, I think we got in a lot of experiences. I mean, I think we have just like a lot of experience, just a lot of specialties between the four of us. I mean, we all dabble in a lot of different things, like I think Southwind kind of Southwind really wasn't everything that kind of introduced us. We all have different ties for different things. Me and John kind of have a Mystique connection. Me and Rob have had a Southeastern connection in the past. There are different things that have connected us in all different ways, and Southwind's kind of the thing that united us, kind of like the Avengers. I don't know. I love comic books too. But it's one of those things to where when you find kindred spirits, you find ways to spend more time with them. And this is just one of the ways that we found to spend more time with each other. And it's great being able to chat and share ideas amongst each other on a weekly basis. And one thing that you find out how much you don't know when you're able to sit down and talk with people every week, because everybody is out learning their own experiences. And then when you get to come back in communion with each other, you get to learn even more of their experiences in that communion setting. And that's why communion is so important, to come in that congregation and be with these people and learn from each other and go out back to the world, share all that good and kind of mind meld and put all that back out there. So it's good to have a community of people that you converse with on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to get your grounding, get your footing, maybe vent a little bit at times. We definitely do that. Not on the podcast, but definitely take time to do that. But then, like I said, share that good to come back to make sure that you put the goodness back out in the world, because we definitely need more of it. So, any final words tonight before we wrap up, y'all? John, Ryan? Awesome. Well, we want to thank everybody out there for listening. Once again, we are so excited for all the engagement on Instagram. By the way, you can follow us on Instagram. Our handle is at Volta Percussion. You can definitely feel free to reach out to us at our email, voltapercussion@gmail.com. And a big shout out to Leo and Zach for sending us those questions. We really appreciate you. Hopefully, we have been able to answer those for you. If you have any other additional questions or comments, anybody out there, feel free to reach out to us and we'll do our best to either answer you in a future podcast episode and definitely respond back to you by email. But we definitely want to thank everybody once again. My name is Elanders Frazier. I've got Mr. John Gaal here, Mr. Robert Dickens Jr., and Mr. Ryan Reed. We'll see you all on the next one. Y'all have a great evening. Peace.